Michael, lovely to see you.
And you too. Lovely to see you, Elton. And thank you so much for making this happen. Thanks for organising it. And I've already enjoyed listening to loads of people. And it's obviously completely intimidating. So
I think
here
you
we
can
are.
manage. Just take your time. Don't go into fast pace. I know how fast you can talk. So
No.
just enjoy and thank you so much for being here. I'm off the air. It's all yours.
Okay, cheers. Thank you, Artem. Thank you to Artem. Thanks to the team. Thanks for making this all possible. I mean, just a few years ago, this would have been like some kind of science fiction dream. Anyway, let me crack on with what it is I'm going to be trying to do with you today. So there are three big things I think I'm going to be looking at. One is the basic question of storytelling. And if we can get the basic question right, lots of things fall into place. The second thing is the big, simple truth of storytelling. And again, when we understand that, lots of things begin to align and we start getting some traction and momentum. The third one is the big lie of storytelling. The big lie, the big fat lie that sits in the middle of storytelling. It's actually a good lie, but we'll be coming to that later. But you know what? I want to start with a story. I'm not going to make any commentary on the story or tell you anything about it. I'm just going to read, which is not something I usually do, but there's something here I want to read to you. And I just want you to listen to and enjoy the story. It's called The Ugly Woman and the Shadow Monster. Once in the rainforest, there lived a woman. She had to live in the rainforest because no one would let her live in the village. They said she was too ugly. People said that she made them feel sick. She lived in the rainforest, but she felt really sad and lonely. When other people came into the rainforest, she would go up to them with what she thought was a big smile on her face, but they would scream and run away. She felt so rejected that she went into the gloomiest, the darkest part of the rainforest and took leaves from the plants and sewed herself a kind of costume. She covered herself with these leaves so that she didn't really look like a human being anymore. She looked like some kind of leaf monster. One night she is in the middle of the rainforest when something runs across her path. "What's that? Who's there?" she said. And suddenly this thing turned and it looked at her. And it was big, it was huge, it was monstrous. And she said, "You are even uglier than me." "What are you?" "I am the shadow monster. I'm not frightened of you." "You don't need to be," said the shadow monster, taking something from his long fur. It looked like a stick with holes in. It was a flute, and he started to play. It was the most beautiful tune she had ever heard. She began to feel totally different. One by one, the leaves began to fall off, and she was glad to be rid of them. Then she felt really thirsty. She went to the pool, and by the light of the moon, she saw her face and saw that she was beautiful. The shadow monster played and played the beautiful music. "I am beautiful," she said. "I can go back to the village, back to the people, and they will be my friends." "And what will happen then?" said the shadow monster. "They will accept me and like me." "Why?" Because I am beautiful." "And why did they reject you before?" "Because I was ugly." "And is there any real difference?" "No." They will only like me because I am beautiful. So I don't want them as friends anyway, because they wouldn't be real friends. I would rather have one real friend than 100 false friends. And do you have a good friend? Said the shadow monster. And she said, yes, I do. And who is that? And she said, you. And now the beautiful woman lives in the rainforest with the shadow monster, and by the light of the moon he plays the flute and she dances. So if you're free, if you want to make any reactions or comments on the story, and as you're doing that, I will tell you where it came from. Many years ago, I was working on a project, and one of the schools that I worked with was a school for children who had learning difficulties. So the story you've just heard was written by a group of maybe 15 young people of about 8 to 11 who had quite severe learning difficulties. And the point is, of course, that none of them could write. We made this orally. We conjured this story from their own experience. And when you put these two things side by side, it suddenly becomes immensely resonant. And one of the things that storytelling can do is create resonance within which we can make meaning move forward. So this brings us to my first question, which is the fundamental question of storytelling. Now, you can ask, well, what is storytelling? Or how do you do storytelling? Or when's the best time to tell a story? Here's a really interesting question, and it's the question I prefer. And it is, where is storytelling? Which sounds a bit counterintuitive to begin with, but actually, when you understand where storytelling takes place, lots of things fall into place. So, for example, we were in a room that was dedicated to us. People were not wandering in and out. It was a place where we could work without any interruptions. And that is absolutely vital. That reminds me a little bit of Stephen King, because Stephen King, when he's writing, he has two phases. The first phase is writing with the door shut. He needs no distractions, just to be on his own. And then bit by bit, as the work starts to develop its own strength, he allows the door open, and the first person that comes in is his wife, and she gets to read the manuscript. The space that we work in needs to be more or less porous, depending on what activity we are engaged in. And for this activity and the story making that I did with these young people, we need an enclosed space. And I'll be coming back more to how space works later on. But the point is that that story would never have been as resonant, never have been as revealing if people were popping their head in and out the whole time to see that they were all okay. We had our own space and our own time in which to create something. And then, of course, under those conditions, they made a beautiful and touching metaphor of their own experience. And I know that all the adults in the room really took to heart the message of the story. Interestingly, the group who were making the story treated it as play. They had an attitude of play and a lightness. And I think this is something that is sometimes missing. Sometimes we take ourselves far too seriously. And actually, it can be through play that we can do our deepest work. What is the most enclosed space you can possibly imagine? The most watertight space? Prison. And I've done quite a lot of work in prisons. And one of the sessions that I enjoy most is when I'm working with families. And they create their own narrative. But there's something about being stuck in a room. You can't go anywhere. It's a prison. The food comes to us and we stay there in the space. And that also gives the time and the space for all sorts of social interactions to happen so that the group can create a story. I'll just quickly show you this. It will take 2 ticks. So here's a story book that was created by a bunch of children and their parents and carers. And it, again, metaphorizes their own experience. It's called The Magic Claw, and we won a Kessler Award for that when we did that. I was working with a talented young designer and artist called Sarah Edmonds. Okay, I want to move, that's where, the space of storytelling, super important. What I'd like to do now is to move on to the big, simple truth of storytelling. And it's this. All the storytelling skills you will ever need, you already have. All of them, even really sophisticated ones. If you need to present, if you're going to do a TED Talk, if you're going to do a storytelling performance in a theatre, all the skills you need, you already have. So what skills am I talking about? So, for example, you already know how to use connectives in order to make sure that a story is coherent. You already know how to use gaze. And I know this because I see people do social storytelling all the time. And I see them using the same tools all the time, unconsciously. So sometimes the storyteller's gaze is on the audience gaze. Sometimes you're looking into the scene of the story. You're looking into the story. That's you can look at the audience, you can look in the scene, you can also do character gaze, whereby you're actually taking on the point of view of a character, and it's all in us already. We can polish it, of course, but the point is it's all in us already. We also all use storytelling modes. We know when to jump into action mode, which is all about the verbs and takes us forward with momentum. We all know how to use description when we're looking at the sensation detail, which tends to slow us down and open out a scene. We all know how to take on the point of view of a character in order to do that. And we all know how to use surprises and pauses as we tell. The trick, of course, is as we want to become more and more fluent, is to work out a process of getting better at it. But the point is, the skills are all already there. Because if you think about it, if they weren't already there, it wouldn't make sense. We wouldn't understand it. Storytelling as an art form, as a performance art, is clear and direct simply because it's a skill we already have. So what does storytelling actually do? And I think this is quite important to nail because it does something that I think is unique. I cannot define storytelling, but I can tell you what it does. And I think it is this. For the duration that a story is jointly told and heard, the jointly created fiction of the story becomes more real than the real world. I'll say that again because it's pretty amazing. For the duration of the time that the story is told and listened to, the jointly created fictive world of the story becomes more real than the real world. If that's not a superpower, I don't know what is. There's an activity I do in some of my workshops, particularly when I'm working with beginners, when what I do is I model a story. I usually do a simple story about something accidental or slightly irritating that happened to me. I tell a story against myself. And then I ask the group to just think of a story. Interestingly, I know, and anyone who's looking can tell, which person has a story and which person hasn't. So you've got a bunch of people sitting in a circle, and I can see the moment the light comes on in someone's face, their body, their entire posture is different. They become much more powerful, and also there's a sense of mischief. And this sense of playful mischief, I think, is absolutely essential to what we do when we're telling stories. So what I'd like to do now is to move on to the big, probably what you've been waiting for actually, the big lie of storytelling. What is the big lie of storytelling? And it's this, that one thing happens at a time. That's it. Story pretends that the world works like that. One thing happens after another. Do you know what? It doesn't. In fact, it's all happening everywhere all the time. But our brains can't cope with that. Our brains can't cope with the fact that I'm sitting here and I've got a light shining over there and there's a cat coming in and there's a book up there that I remember the title of and what happened in the book and so on. And there's a card that I got from my daughter. All this stuff around us is happening all the time. But we choose. We make a conscious choice of a chain of events and we call it a story. The challenge then is to know when it's getting too cramped, when it's getting too prescriptive, and when to open it out. And what I'd like to tell you now is I'd like to share an experience that I had with a group where the whole story that they had become tight and cramped and horrible. So we're going back now about 15 years. And I was working with a company that made artificial joints, artificial elbows, shoulders, knees, and so on. So the group, which were all men, this group of guys were unbelievably skilled, absolutely brilliant at what they did, and they were in different teams. There was an engineering team, and there was a team of salespeople. There was a medical team that could communicate with the doctors who were actually working on the patients, and so on. So different teams. The issue was that each team had its own line manager. And the number one sin that they told me about in this organization was letting people down. Whatever happens, you must not let people down. Now you can see what's going to happen when you put these two things together. It means that at no point can people pass the work on to the next group, because they'll be letting someone down if they're not careful. So what happens is that the whole thing stalls and the whole thing gets crunched down and can't move. It gets completely stuck, and there was nothing they could do. Now here's the big accident that happened, is that someone who I know who works in an organization that brings arts and business together was on a radio program with someone that actually the CEO of this particular firm. And she was saying how great arts and cultural and storytelling interventions are for corporations. And he said, oh yeah, prove it. And she said, okay, I challenge you. I want to let your teams have a go working in this way. And he rose to the challenge and he made the thing happen. And what happened was that in the event, I did a lot of different creative and mainly storytelling activities. So I told half a story and got different people to end the story. So I had maybe 4 groups, and each group came back with a different ending. Now, at the time, I was just doing a simple activity. But in retrospect, I can see that making a starting point and a finish and then getting people to create different endings is very powerful indeed. And of course, we're looking for the next move, the thing that will take us forward. And by doing this, they became very empowered, and they could see that in exactly the same way that stories can finish differently. So the way they're working does not have to be the way it is. And one of the things that happened, because everything got so crunchy and clenched, is that no one could tell the truth. And I did lots of playful games with these guys. And there was a moment when I knew it was going to work. We were in a beautiful center, which had a big glass front to it, and the sun was shining. So I thought, great, let's take advantage of this. And I'm going to send them out to do some work, to gather some things in nature. There's a beautiful garden outside. So I sent them off. And the moment I knew that it was going to work was when I saw them walking off the path. A lot of groups will stay to the path. This group walked off the path and started to ferret around and rummage around in order to find objects in the hedges and underneath stones and everywhere. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, aha, this group's really going to come through, because they were doing this thing, which at the time I called gleeful trespass. So if you're gleeful, it's like you're joyful. So joyful trespass, going where you're not meant to go joyfully, just to find out what is there. And they came back and we finished the day. And what really surprised me was that these are all men of a certain age, and the amount of emotion that they finally allowed themselves to express was really deep and moving, because they knew that they couldn't move forward because of the situation that was created from above. And so they gave a very big, strong message to senior management that things weren't working, but they didn't feel the authority that they could just come out and say it. But by working together and telling stories, before long, they felt that they could do the difficult job of saying to senior management, what we're doing isn't working and we know what will work better. And there was an interesting result of that. And in fact, the CEO at the end of all that left. I can't claim any credit for that, I don't think. I think it was just a coincidence. But that's just an example of how things can work. But you need to leave the door to the unexpected open. Getting it right doesn't necessarily work. So I want to talk quickly now about how getting it wrong can sometimes be the best way of getting it right. So I was working in a school. In the school, there were a bunch of year 4, so that makes them 8 years old boys who had been targeted because their oral speech was not good. So I got them together and we started to talk, and I could see straight away what the problem was. There are these words called connectives, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, particularly if you're interested in storytelling. These are words like so, once, and then, suddenly, the next day, however, but. All those words are absolutely vital. Interestingly, if you are not told stories, you don't get them. If you're not told stories or read stories, you don't feel how the connectives work. And if you don't have connectives, you cannot make coherent sentences, and you certainly can't make a coherent story. And that's what the problem was with these boys. And I tried various things and nothing worked. I tried all sorts of strategies that I've done before, modeling them, getting them to say it with me and so on. Nothing worked. And then I had a brilliant idea. So I said to them, look, what's your favorite thing? And they all said rugby. So Wales is a country, small country that is rugby mad. The most famous rugby team in the world are the All Blacks, the New Zealand team, and they were crazy about the All Blacks. And if you're a rugby fan, you'll know that before they play an international game, the All Blacks do this haka, which is a very physical, very intimidating war dance. And the other team just has to stand there and take it. So I had this great idea that I would get the kids to physicalize connectives using a haka. And I thought it was a great idea. They were up for it. We went into a specific room where we were going to spend some time. So I had my own space all ready to go. Brilliant, no interruptions. Unfortunately, it was a computer suite. So there were computers on the tables and chairs. What kind of chairs? Chairs with wheels. So you put 12 boys of about 8 years old in a room full of chairs with wheels. I don't need to tell you what happened next. They're zooming all around the room on their chairs. I've completely lost control. It's a complete disaster. Finally, I get them together and then we try and do some work. But before long, time runs out and I have to take them back to the classroom. And the teacher's looking at me like this. Oh yeah, you thought you were going to be able to do something with these boys, were you? But I was determined, right? So I was going to do the same thing again. So the following week, we did exactly the same. And before we went in, I said, okay, boys, I want you to agree, no rolling on the chairs. And they said, yeah, we promise. So they went in, and then this other thing happened. They started to fight. They started to quarrel. And then someone said, I got a headache. And another boy said, I've got a belly ache. And then some of them are crying. I think, okay, fine. Let's finish there. So I took them back into the classroom and the teacher's really pleased now because this visitor has made a complete mess of everything. And I thought to myself, well, here you go. Forget it. Let it go. You can't succeed every time. Then there was a short holiday. And then there was a week off where I wasn't in. And then I went in again thinking, oh my goodness me, how's it going to go? I walk in through the door and all the boys rush up to me and they say, Mike, they all call me Michael Harvey. They use my full name for some reason. Michael Harvey, let us show you. We've done our connectives haka on their own. They use their own break time, their own free time to work on a connectives haka. and they showed it to me, and they showed it to the whole class. And there is no way I could have got there with that group if I hadn't gone through that sticky middle place. Weirdly, once it stopped working and I abandoned it, their momentum continued it on. They made the place in which the good stuff could happen once I was out of the room. Maybe I had to not be there. Maybe my presence in the room was too much of a distraction. Anyway, they put it all together and I was so pleased. And this brings me to another point, particularly, well, anything to do with creativity really, and that is to have a high wonky tolerance. So what is wonky? Wonky is a word that means it's not quite right. It's a bit strange, a bit lumpy and bumpy and doesn't run smoothly. When I'm working with anyone working with storytelling, there is a big temptation to try and get it right. Well, guess what? You can't. All you can do is make the situation, the space in which it will become right. I've seen people in my own workshops say that they have come out of other workshops bruised because they had been told they'd been doing it wrong. They had to do it like this. No, not like this, like that. No, this, no, like this. And they come away feeling completely disempowered. We must allow ourselves in the process of getting ourselves ready to be wonky, to be imperfect. And how do we get better? By practicing, by doing practice, which is careful, mindful, embodied repetition of our specific skills. So high wonky tolerance is something that I've just talked about. Rigor is important. You can't just throw yourself into storytelling. Rigor is connected with the actual way that storytelling works. It's embedded in our social being and the way we are with each other. Part of our challenge is to bring it out and become conscious of something that is so deep inside us. Then it can really work. The team is absolutely essential. So the team of engineers and so on, they were super tight. And once I gave them the place where they could effectively play in, they came up with the goods. They told the truth, even though it was hard. The idea of trespass, gleeful trespass. So doing something that's never been done before feels a bit naughty. It really does feel a bit naughty. That's not a reason for not doing it. And nothing bad will really happen, I don't think. And playfulness is really important because playfulness is also very serious. If you look at the playground research done by the OPs, Peter and Iona Opie, they have noticed that child's play is taken very seriously. They're playful, but it's also very, very serious. And that's sometimes a combination that we are a bit uncomfortable with. And so what comes out of this way of working, this storytelling approach? First of all, it's fundamentally cooperative. We work together to make the good stuff happen. We are brave. We are prepared to go into a space not knowing the answer, but to find the answer. It is value-led. So there are certainly certain things that we value. There are certain things that we pride ourselves on. There are certain ways we want to behave. And this value is not a principle or an abstract thing. It is felt and embedded. So it is part of us. Humor and play, super important. Compassion, yes, absolutely. We need that because sometimes we will make a mess and we need a compassionate company to get us going. Clarity, what is it we're doing again? Clarity. We are trying to make this thing happen. And of course, purpose. So we've had quite a roller coaster ride. I've talked to you about the shadow monster story. This is something that a bunch of learning, challenged 8-year-olds put together, and it's deep, resonant, but light. And there's also this story, The Magic Claw, that was created by a family group, 3 or 4 families working together. The father, who is a prisoner, his wife, or sometimes mother, and also their children, working together as a whole group, doing all the pictures and all the words to create the story. And then, of course, there's the whole work of oral storytelling, which is absolutely fundamental to us and how we are as human beings. And there are ways of doing it that have a big effect, and ways that, if you're not careful, which allow you to get in your own way. But if we go back to the things that we talked about earlier on, the big basic question of storytelling, where is it taking place? If you make the space and the environment for it, it will happen. The big simple truth of storytelling, we already have these skills in us. Our job, if we want to use storytelling, is to bring them out, to hone them, to become more compelling, to make the world of story more real. The big lie of storytelling, of course, is that we choose what events to tell. It is a choice. And because it's a choice, that's also a powerful thing. And what storytelling does, this amazing, miraculous thing, is that for the duration of time that a story is jointly told and listened to, the jointly created fictive world of the story becomes more real than the real world. And that is how we change things. So I think that's where I'm going to stop talking, if that's okay. If anyone has any questions.
And here's one coming from Sergey. I'll translate that for you. So have you ever experienced an instance when a story would frighten the listener?
Well, sometimes stories are frightening. I mean, they're meant to be frightening. They're meant to be, I can think of story material that I use which is horrific. There's a story from our own national epic where a child is thrown into a fire by his uncle during a feast and a war is started. So actually, stories, many of them are, yes, prepared to tell really dangerous truths. The good stories are the ones that take you on the journey past that into some kind of acceptance or other, that there's randomness and pain in all sorts of places. And some of these older stories in particular have the wisdom and the depth to help us go some way towards processing it.
Awesome. I actually have one question. Oh, wait, Alexander went first, so that's a good one. Is there danger then childs prefer stories more than real world going into our own fantasy, and how do we avoid it?
Again, because of the place. Because if you watch a storytelling event around the kitchen table or in the pub, what happens is that there's a moment when someone starts to tell a story and you can tell from a distance that it's happening. People lean in. Also, people will swap gazes. Mostly the gaze will be on the storyteller. There's a very clear storytelling event happening. And then when the story finishes, there's this kind of release as the group opens. And very often at that moment, they will laugh, even if the story's not funny. So we are very clear socially when the story is starting, when we're in the story, and when we're leaving the story. There is one small danger point, and that is you could, in principle, get people into a story, get them into the story moment. It's very hard to leave until the event is finished. So there is potential danger here. I don't think I've ever seen that happen, but I think we are pretty effective self-regulating beings, and I think people know when to walk away.
Thank you for that. You know, I was thinking about your advice on where does storytelling happen, and this idea that a story has to, like, you know, invite someone into this different space. And I'm thinking, well, people in corporate, they don't often tell stories like that. They often tell like, oh, so I had an employee do this and I felt that. So maybe there is an advice you could give people in corporate who they all have storytelling
Sure.
skills, just like you said. So what can be done if a story is like
Absolutely.
it's here but it falls flat because there's no space and people are, afraid to be more specific?
Do you know what? There's a deep irony in the use of the term corporation, because what's a corporation? It's a body. Body. What is absent in a lot of corporate activity? The body. And for me, that is often a way in to making people being more real, is to inhabit our bodies. Because most people feel shit about their bodies. But once we start to inhabit our bodies, there's a resonance in the room that makes communication and authenticity possible. So if I could ban PowerPoint, I think I probably would. If I could ban tables, I think I probably would. Because there's you don't need a table. You don't need a great big boardroom. You can just sit. You can just be in front of people. The difficulty is being that exposed, being that physically exposed. But physical exposure is vital to communication. So, for example, if you think briefly about a TED talk, they're standing up. They're standing up. You can see them from head to foot. You can read their body language. And the TED people did that deliberately to make people communicate. If you go and stand behind a lectern, you might as well not be there. You might as well put a DVD on or something. But when we become physically present, there's and sometimes that means you have to leave the architecture of your own space, because it's almost impossible to be authentic in it. I did some work for a top English university in a room that had been designed like a recording studio. There was zero resonance, no echo at all. So your voice was flat. You couldn't feel the resonance in the room. So I think there's something about bodily resonance, and changing the space so that the resonance and communication can happen that will bring us to
Awesome.
authenticity.
Thank you so much. That was such a great excursion on storytelling, in both a demonstration, I would say. I have the last question, and I see there are questions in the chat. You can feel free to stay and answer them in here or in our Telegram chat. But a tradition.
Okay.
I have a question, and it goes like this: a culture, yes, but let me just read that one. Culture forms the stories we tell, but the stories form the culture we live in. So what came first, in your opinion, stories or culture? Story.
The story, obviously. How could anyone disagree with that? Now, of course, you can take the other point of view, but the point of stories is that they're an intervention. So for me, that's the interesting bit, where we're in a situation, we intervene with a story and we see what happens.
So story is an intervention, therefore it went first. Michael, thank you so much. Guys, let's just show Michael how much we've experienced this with our fires. And Michael, thank you so much for being here. Please stay with us for the rest if you would like to. Yes. And we are moving forward to our next speaker. So Michael, cheers again.